Henry Kissinger walks into a bar. It sounds like a joke. Henry Kissinger and a penguin walk into a bar. I'm not asking what you do, but what would it displease you if I walked over and punched Henry Kissinger in the face? Would you find that entertaining?
I would.
Would you have a frisson of pleasure even? Would you feel that justice is in some small way served?
You hate Henry Kissinger.
I fucking hate him.
Yeah.
Because in my travels, I stumble across his good works everywhere I go.
Right. Let's do this.
A rabbit punch.
No kidney punch.
Yeah.
Cheers, guys. Oh, my.
Henry Kissinger walks into a bar.
It's good to be back here doing a broadcast. Thank you for the few of you that are here to tune in and the others who are going to watch when this is archived and available for everyone to see. I've been away for the past 2 months. I'm a dad now, and so I've spent the last couple of months doing dad things, I suppose. So I'm getting back into the swing of doing the regular live broadcast that I would do weekly. And I don't know that it'll be possible to just, immediately get back to doing it. As we come to the end of the year, I'll do a few of these live shows for the channel. But, it seemed like as good as time as any to come back because we're celebrating the death of Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, who is a revered statesman among elites and to the people who are human beings. He was a war criminal. He was a monstrous figure in U.S. foreign policy, representative of U.S. empire. And so it was a good time to come back and do a show. And beyond that, there's so much that I have left untouched through this channel when it comes to Israel's war on Gaza. There's the Genocide Joe, which I'd like to get to. The president 2 months later now has a nickname affixed to his presidency and probably well-deserved, and also is looking at maybe losing re-election because of what's going on with all the genocidal violence that has been meted out against Palestinians. And so we'll get to that. And then I, of course, have, as I usually do with the show, an update on Julian Assange and the political case against him. But in this edition of the live stream, I want to get into what is the lawsuit against the CIA and former CIA director Mike Pompeo, and this rare but extraordinary court hearing that happened a little more than a week ago, actually about a couple of weeks now. And in this hearing, attorneys for Americans, journalists and attorneys that were allegedly spied upon in the Ecuador embassy when they went to meet Assange, were able to actually air their arguments out in open court by virtue of the fact that the judge in the case in New York held a hearing where the lawyer representing the CIA and Pompeo had to come in and defend the motion to dismiss. And then these Americans, their attorney was able to make counter arguments about why the lawsuit should go forward. And there's some really important exchanges in it, and the judge has been seemingly open to the challenge and hasn't swiftly dismissed it. So I want to get to that, but there's a lot that has been going on. This is a kind of a transition time for me. I also want to share the translation here of my book. So I have Guilty of Journalism out, and this is now available in Italy for people who seemingly speak and read Italian. And this is pretty cool. I had this came out from the publisher is Piema, and Piema did it. And the cover, man, like I have to say, this cover is extraordinary. I like this cover more than the actual cover that I developed for the book that came out. So, I have the poster behind me, but if you are not familiar, this is the Guilty of Journalism book. This came out from me in March. This is my first book. This is The Political Case Against Julian Assange, and the foreword by Abby Martin. And then on the back, blurbs from Noam Chomsky, Daniel Ellsberg, and the inside here, I was able to get endorsements from John Kiriakou, John Pilger, Ryan Grimm, Medea Benjamin, Ann Wright, Matt Kennard, Trevor Tim, Stefania Marizzi, and Carrie Shankman, as well as Tom Mueller and my colleague and friend Rania Kalik, who I do the Unauthorized Disclosure weekly podcast with. And some of those people are going to be speaking at the Belmarsh Tribunal on December 9th. They're convening another one for Assange. We'll get to that at the end of this show, but whoa, what a moment. And what a moment to be a part of when we were sitting. It was last night in the evening, and we learned that Henry Kissinger had finally kicked it, that his life had come to an end. And so let's pull up. I want to show you just how much this has been a part of our culture. Wishing for Henry Kissinger's death has been part of online culture. And what you saw last night was probably shocking to the conscience of elites, and it should be. But they're probably blown over by the amount of glee that people had for this big, huge sack of bones finally kicking it and no longer being alive. And so I collected, just so people can remember this. Liliana Segura is a journalist, but back in 2018, she was expressing what people have said repeatedly on the platform. Henry Kissinger is still alive. I mean, what the fuck? And then Pixelated Boat, welcome to 2020. Henry Kissinger is still alive. And then Kate Aronoff, journalist who, I don't know, at the time she wasn't involved with the Daily Poster, but is now with the Daily Poster, or The Lever. It's The Lever News. Every time another celebrity dies, I just get more angry that Henry Kissinger is still alive. And to show you this example, and this guy here is actually an author of Star Wars books, and even he, somebody who's involved in comics and that kind of thing. There's all these awesome people keep dying, and Henry Kissinger is still alive. What the fuck? So, as Tom Morello, to get us started, would express whenever somebody was died, or whenever you remember that somebody was not alive, that wasn't Henry Kissinger, the culture was to say that you were bummed that that person was no longer alive and that Henry Kissinger was still haunting us with his ghastly presence. And so here, Joe Strummer of The Clash is dead. Henry Kissinger is still alive. I wonder what karma we have brought upon ourselves to make it so. That was in 22 from Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine. And then Betty White died. And but Henry Kissinger was not dead. And that was the most important thing. So get me off this ride. Eddie Van Halen dies. You'll notice a theme. A lot of these are musicians. They'll be actors or people you might recognize who do not have a role in bombing the shit out of black or brown people in the global south or in parts of Asia or the Middle East. So Eddie Van Halen is dead. Henry Kissinger is still alive. That was in 2020. Molly, no matter how you feel about the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think we can all agree that Henry Kissinger should not still be alive. So a political person would kick the bucket, no longer be here. Why isn't Henry Kissinger dead? Tom Petty and Prince are dead. Henry Kissinger is alive and meeting with the president. Fuck this timeline. And then this past year took from us Eric Hobsbawm, Whitney Houston, Phyllis Diller. Henry Kissinger, on the other hand, is still alive. Corey Robin expressing widespread sentiment. And I mean it. And I think it was hyper focused. Younger people were introduced to Henry Kissinger, although Bernie Sanders has betrayed many of the foreign policy principles that he claimed to stand behind, especially in the way that he has dutifully been silent as this war on Gaza unfolds and not spoken up and been very, very measured and careful to not be seen as an antagonist of Joe Biden. And that being said, when he ran in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, we all remember that Hillary Clinton was the friend of Kissinger, and it was Bernie who was saying that he was proud that Henry Kissinger was not his friend. And that introduced a lot of millennials and some people who are now in Gen Z. The younger generations were introduced to the bloodshed of which this was what Henry Kissinger was responsible. All the killing. How do you think about it? Think about the hundreds of thousands, millions of people that were killed. The list is rather long to have been involved in that much genocide or ethnic cleansing, however you want to refer to it, and the encouragement of the sacrifice of people. You have Argentines, you have Chileans, you have Cambodians, Vietnamese. Of course, those are the two most well-known because of the carpet bombing that happened hand in hand. He was partnered with Richard Nixon and facilitating and encouraging that kind of systematic violence. But there's Indonesians that paid a price. There's Indian people. There's Pakistanis that paid a price. Importantly, for the moment, there's Palestinians. It was not lost on people that there was an International Day of Solidarity. And it was the same time, and this was for Palestine, and it was the same time that Henry Kissinger had left, which was appropriate. And, in solidarity, the divine world around us decided to eliminate Henry Kissinger from our meat space. And so that was a good thing. It was ultimately part of the good yesterday of seeing Henry Kissinger no longer breathing. And Angolans there's just so many millions of people who you could say the blood was on Henry Kissinger's hands, and yet at no point was he ever held accountable for these war crimes. Henry Kissinger was not a figure that was brought before The Hague. He was not brought before any tribunal. There was no real commission, or whether it's Truth and Reconciliation, or there wasn't any hearings in Congress. Nothing happened in the United States to hold this person accountable. Henry Kissinger lived for decades after that, perfecting the art of being able to turn all of the ghastly work that you have done as the mass that you were, the mass of cells that you were that were contributing to all this violence. You can now counsel and give advice to people in future presidential administrations, and you could make money off of that consultancy work. Henry Kissinger is one of the first people. And in fact, it's appropriate that we learned about Henry Kissinger's death not from anybody in his family, nobody that he had as a close friend. It came from his consultant firm, which tells you a lot about where he occupied, the space that he occupied. And so a couple of videos to share here, clips that speak to this moment. I think that I want to show you the clip of Antony Blinken today. He was meeting with Israel President Isaac Herzog, and they were both sharing their effusive praise for, as they describe him, the statesman. They call him the statesman. So let me get this video file up here for you.
Dr. Henry Kissinger, who has left us peacefully tonight. We are big admirers of Henry Kissinger, who laid down the foundations of so many great decisions of his and processes which he has led, which has brought results that we feel until today, peaceful results, He laid the cornerstone of the peace agreement, which were later signed with Egypt. In our last conversation, he ended the call by saying, "Mr. President, please know I've always loved and admired and supported the state of Israel. And so I've always felt his love and compassion for Israel and his belief in the Jewish state."
So before we get to Antony Blinken's comments there, what Herzog is saying, and it is the position of the Israeli government, and it's the position that the U.S. endorses. And so Henry Kissinger, though, however, occupied a role in which he reinforced and encouraged the apartheid state. And so the violence that we're seeing carried out, that is generated, that is something that has been facilitated by, if he's the godfather of U.S. imperialist foreign policy, this is something that he's a steward of all the way to the end of his life, all the way through to his 100th year of life being on Earth. He decided to play this part of making sure that there was never any mistake. They always knew that Henry Kissinger supported the Israeli apartheid state, and he supported the South African apartheid state. So I shouldn't leave that out about the violence that was going on there, the brutality that took place while he was, influencing the U.S. State Department and influencing the U.S. foreign policy globally around something like South Africa.
You noted the passing of Henry Kissinger. Secretary Kissinger really set the standard for everyone who followed in this job. I was very privileged to get his counsel many times, including as recently as about a month ago. He was extraordinarily generous with his wisdom, with his advice. Few people were better students of history. Even fewer people did more to shape history than Henry Kissinger. Thank you.
But he shaped history, all right. He shaped it by wiping out entire populations and entire lineages of families and removing, a whole bunch of people who got in the way of the U.S. global agenda, going after Salvador Allende. That's him. The coup in Chile, saying we're going to make the economy scream. That was Nixon. And then removing him, and then Augusto Pinochet, and you get to cheer, celebrate, and everything is good for Henry Kissinger while there's military dictatorship and torture and abuse and people being executed who are leftists or socialists, people who are political opponents now of a fascist military dictatorship. That kind of thing in Latin America, that is a hallmark of Henry Kissinger's statesman-like foreign policy. So if those are the words that people who are in positions of power like Blinken want to use, and they want to praise the kind of counseling that they receive, then we should take them literally and at their word. We should recognize that what they're saying, they mean it. And when we consider the meaning behind it is that they are praising the advice that came from somebody who was responsible for the deaths of millions of people, and a foreign policy that results in that is not collateral damage. It is not just an unfortunate byproduct of trying to maintain a social order and the power and dominance of the United States. It is, in fact, part of maintaining power and control over different regions of the world. And that is what Blinken is praising. So if he was up until a month ago getting advice from Henry Kissinger, we should understand that Antony Blinken is saying essentially that, it's even possible that after the Hamas attack that became the response, the Israel war on Gaza then is unleashed. And we've seen set in motion a pattern that fits the blueprint for an ethnic cleansing, and that unfolding, determining the way that the U.S. government responds, we should say to ourselves that Henry Kissinger was giving Blinken advice, and his advice was taken and has played a part in how the U.S. State Department has whitewashed and co-signed or been complicit in the genocidal violence that has been unfolding. And we'll get to more of it, but just to go back to just Henry Kissinger himself before we move on to the other parts of the world. Well, first of all, he's not somebody that was ever willing to take responsibility for his actions, unlike Robert McNamara, who was a Pentagon secretary, who did this Fog of War documentary with Errol Morris. It's been shared that at one point there was this is written by Stephen Talbot, and he had a chance to occasion to interview Henry Kissinger. And one of the things that he found when he went to talk to him was that he mentioned he was interviewing Robert McNamara, and at the same time he was going to talk to Henry Kissinger. And when Henry Kissinger learned that he had talked with Robert McNamara, what happened was that Henry Kissinger pretended. He started acting, not in a good way, but he was saying that boo-hoo, boo-hoo, and he was rubbing his eyes. And he said of McNamara that he's still beating his breast, right? Still feeling guilty. He was mocking. He was doing a sing-song voice and patting his heart for emphasis. And Stephen said he was upset that he didn't have a camera rolling at that time, but he was basically, saying that Robert McNamara was, just like a wimp, basically a wimp for having so much, having his conscience come back to him at the end of his life, having reflections about the toll that his work for the U.S. government had taken on people in Vietnam and then in Cambodia. And so that's one aspect of Henry Kissinger. There's the bombing of Vietnam. There are these quotes out there from him, wave after wave of planes. You see, they can't see the B-52 and they dropped 1 million pounds of bombs. He's talking about Vietnam. I bet you we will have had more planes over there in one day than Johnson had in a month. Each plane can carry about 10 times the load of World War II planes could carry. Cheering the carpet bombing of the Vietnamese. And then, bombing Cambodia. Nixon wants a massive bombing campaign in Cambodia. He doesn't want to hear anything about it. It's an order to be done. Anything that flies or anything that moves. There's always talk in the Vietnam War. It's a great book by Nick Turse, Kill Anything That Moves. That was the policy in Vietnam, extending to Cambodia, Chile. He says, I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its people. The issues are much too important for the Chilean voters to be left to decide for themselves. And assassinating people, or assassination, is an act of insanity and national humiliation. To have a law prohibiting the president from ordering assassination. I mean, this was a statement that he made at a National Security Council meeting, 1975. Believe me, nothing ever held Henry Kissinger back during the time of Nixon. There were world leaders who were assassinated. And he also spoke, about Soviet Jews too. He's getting praise from the ADL, and he said the emigration of Jews from the Soviet Union is not an objective of American foreign policy. And if they put Jews into gas chambers in the Soviet Union, it's not an American concern, maybe a humanitarian concern. Of course, I mentioned Daniel Ellsberg blurbed my book and endorsed it. And he was someone who Kissinger dubbed the most dangerous man in America. And I think It's been said that Kissinger didn't blanch very easily when he was met with crises. He was seen as kind of an unshakable person. He didn't really lose his cool, but he was afraid of Daniel Ellsberg. And that was something I shared at the Dissenter. I wrote a whole thing about Daniel Ellsberg and Henry Kissinger, or Kissinger versus the most dangerous man in America, which is a badge of honor that Daniel Ellsberg wore for the entirety of the rest of his life, as it became known that this was a label that was foisted upon him by this figure. And one of the things that, Henry Kissinger happened to believe was that Daniel at any moment was going to just start spreading more and more material beyond the Pentagon Papers. It would get worse. It would get even harder for the Nixon administration to operate globally. So think about what happened with WikiLeaks and the publication of these diplomatic cables from the State Department. And that was what he thought was going to happen beyond just the study that had been put together on the Vietnam War that showed the many, many lies. And by the way, Kissinger refused to read that study, and Ellsberg confronted him with it and asked him why he wouldn't read it. And he basically insisted that there wasn't anything to be learned from the Pentagon Papers. So the lies and everything, it was all very deliberate on the part of the Nixon administration, including with Kissinger. So I want to say that this is about the encounter that Daniel Ellsberg had with Kissinger. So as people tell you that you're not allowed to celebrate, you have to be civil, and you appropriately give them the finger and tell them that, no, this is a great time. It is really great to see Henry Kissinger is no longer around. It is great that finally this man is no longer breathing oxygen. You should know about the time that Ellsberg writes about in his book Secrets, memoir that he wrote about, where he met with Kissinger on a patio. At that time, General Alexander Haig was with Daniel Ellsberg, or was with Henry Kissinger. So he meets up. He's brought by a friend who is coming to interview Henry Kissinger. He's brought along this person who brings him along as a friend who wrote for Parade magazine. His name was Lloyd Shearer, and he was invited to go attend this lunch. And while he's there, Kissinger encounters Ellsberg. And this is before, by the way, I believe this is before, or almost around the time that the Pentagon Papers have been, let's see. Yeah, this is before the Pentagon Papers. So on that patio, Kissinger says, I have learned more from Dan Ellsberg than from any other person. I have learned more from Dan Ellsberg than from any other person. Ellsberg believed that Kissinger would say to him that he had learned about Vietnam through Daniel Ellsberg. But Kissinger said about bargaining. And it didn't make a lot of sense to Ellsberg until he remembered that the talks that he gave to one of Kissinger's seminars at Harvard in 1955, he gave a lecture series. It was called The Art of Coercion. And that was 11 years ago. And so Ellsberg responded, "You have a very good memory." And Ellsberg said, with a guttural drawl, Kissinger added, "They were very good lectures." And then Ellsberg shared, "Nice, except when I thought about it later, it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The lectures that I had given to his class had to do with Hitler's blackmail of Austria and Czechoslovakia in the late 30s that had allowed him to take over those countries just by threatening their destruction. One of the talks was titled The Theory and Practice of Blackmail, and the other was The Political Use of Madness. And Hitler had deliberately cultivated among his adversaries the impression of his own irrational unpredictability. This is what Ellsberg said Kissinger found admirable. He really liked this about Hitler, the irrational unpredictability of his actions, particularly before World War II. Ellsberg continued, he couldn't be counted on not to carry out a threat to do something crazy, mutually destructive. It worked for him up to a point because he was crazy, madly aggressive, and reckless. But after a certain point, it brought the world down around him. He's referring to Hitler, not Kissinger. Kissinger never had the world brought down around him, and we're all worse off for it. It wasn't a tactic that I was recommending for the United States, Ellsberg wrote in his book, or anyone else for that matter. Far from it, but Kissinger was someone who was essentially imitating Hitler in this respect, or taking after what Hitler had done in this respect, and believing that it was valuable to cultivate madness and court disaster. And there might have been an element to that in the way that he went about carrying out foreign policy. For example, what Ellsberg writes about in his book is that under Nixon, the invasion of Cambodia in April, he connected Kissinger's compliment to leaks from unnamed Nixon officials who claimed that there was a major motive for the invasion, and it was to convince the Soviets, the Chinese, and the North Vietnamese that the U.S. decision-making at the highest levels was unpredictable, and that since we could do something so evidently erratic and crazy as to invade Cambodia at this stage of the war, they could not count on our reasonableness or prudence in the crisis. It was chilling to realize that the memory of Hitler's tactic as such was in the mind of the top White House advisor 3 months after Cambodia, after the bombing began in Cambodia. So again, all praise, everything, all sorts of tributes. I've showered them on Daniel Ellsberg. I much rather talk about Daniel Ellsberg and the way he exposed Henry Kissinger. I'd much rather talk about Anthony Bourdain, all these other figures, and what they have shown us in their exposure of Henry Kissinger, and what they recognize about the truth of U.S. foreign policy from coming to understand the impact of a figure like Henry Kissinger. But then we have people out there who are incapable of shame. So Tony Blair comes out with, there's no one like Henry Kissinger. If it is possible for diplomacy at its highest level to be a form of art, Henry was an artist. Henry was an artist. In the way he could take blood and make it into a painting. No, in the like you found it as art, the way that he could carry out genocide. He perfected the art of genocide. Blair continues, I consider it one of the greatest privileges of my political life to have known him. From that first moment of meeting him to the last, he inspired me and taught me, and I will forever be grateful to him. Of course, Tony Blair was partners with George W. Bush in the invasion of Iraq, and the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives lost in Iraq, and then devastated by the unleashing of ISIS on that region. That blood's on Tony Blair's hands, so we should believe him. When he says he takes after Henry Kissinger, we should believe Tony Blair. These people are telling us who they are, and they're flaunting the fact that there isn't ever going to be any justice, that they're never going to be held accountable for what they have done. And that is Henry Kissinger's legacy. His legacy is ultimately not just, it is important, but it's not just all the blood, but it's also that you can get away with it, that you won't be held responsible for all the blood that is spilled. So then we have, and there is something corrosive and very despicable happening in Germany. There's a kind of psychosis at the center of power in Germany right now. We've seen it on display when it comes to Gaza, because people who are engaged in freedom of expression are being rounded up and arrested simply for expressing support for Palestinians. It's been far worse in Germany than in the United States, and there has been a panic in the United States. So Here's Olaf Scholz in Germany. Henry Kissinger shaped American foreign policy like few others. His commitment to the transatlantic friendship between the USA and Germany was significant, and he always remained close to his German homeland. The world has lost a great diplomat. And so you have this like washing of his record by going back to his personal life. I mean, I guess he had a good relationship with Germany because the US and Germany rely on each other to it's part of the EU and maintaining the Western order. But just gross. Just gross. And again, diplomat, there's not a lot of diplomacy in the bombs that are being dropped. Diplomacy at the barrel of a gun. So then here's Ursula von der Leyen with the EU. She's distinguished herself, and she's talking about Henry Kissinger's strategy and excellence in diplomacy, that it shaped global politics throughout the 20th century, and his influence and legacy will continue to reverberate well into the 21st century. Again, remember, I said if these people say something, we should take them literally and at their words. So everything that Henry Kissinger stands for is what these people are emulating when they go about handling or managing the war in Ukraine. Ursula von der Leyen is saying that Kissinger's legacy speaks to that conflict with what's unfolding in Gaza and with Israel. Ursula von der Leyen would tell you, what can we learn from Henry Kissinger? And so you can see how the brutality does not get stopped. You can see how the people who are supposed to be there to stop this and find some resolution, it perverts what we know as diplomacy. It perverts it because it is not diplomatic to be so against ceasefires, something that Ursula von der Leyen did not want a ceasefire in Gaza. There's now been a truce. It could develop into more of a permanent ceasefire, but she herself was against it. And we've seen sabotage of efforts. We know that in the early months of the war in Ukraine, that Boris Johnson and the UK and other European Union countries didn't want the war to be stopped. And so now it's stalemated. We're in this intractable position with the war in Ukraine. There's like political sport has actually been evaporating in the United States for the war in Ukraine to keep going. But she is telling us that Henry Kissinger is her inspiration and a figure that she could be modeling off her own foreign policy, the way that she approaches world crises. And then here's George W. Bush's, and we get a painting from this other unrepentant war criminal who, no matter how dopey he seemed to behave, that always gave him a bit of insulation from, I think, being taken seriously in the way that Henry Kissinger or Dick Cheney is taken seriously. And so you have, the war criminal painting here. There he is. And from Dallas, Texas, George W. Bush saying, America's lost one of the most dependable and distinctive voices on foreign affairs with the passing of Henry Kissinger. I've long admired the man who fled the Nazis as a young boy from a Jewish family, then fought them in the United States Army. When he later became Secretary of State, his appointment as a former refugee said as much about his greatness as it did America's greatness. He worked in the administrations of 2 presidents and counseled many more. I'm grateful for that service and advice, but I'm not grateful for his friendship. But I am most grateful for his friendship. Again, Laura and I will miss his wisdom, his charm, and his humor, and we will always be thankful for the contributions of Henry Kissinger. And what you don't have there is anything about what he did. You can't talk about it. Like even George W. Bush, who is cheering Henry Kissinger and talking about how great he is, can't even talk about his accomplishments, because to tell you what you think makes him an accomplished statesman outs you as somebody who supports a warmonger and a genocidal maniac who did not believe that he ever should be challenged. That people questioned him about this when people raised the word. He thought that war criminal was like a pejorative. There's a clip out there. I'm not going to go grab it. I've actually showed it before, but there is a time when he was asked about this, and he treated war criminal like a pejorative. You know, like now you hear people say things like billionaire is used as a pejorative, rich or whatever is treated like a pejorative. Well, he tried to get people to see war criminal as a slur for that was unfair to be labeled in that manner. And so this from George W. Bush is erasing everything that Henry Kissinger was and what he stood for. There's also a statement that came out from the ADL, and that's horrific. I won't put it up on the screen, but I'll go ahead and read it because, again, they are whitewashing Henry Kissinger. And they say that Henry Kissinger was a towering intellect, diplomat, and practitioner who, not without controversy, helped shape American foreign policy with a lasting impact worldwide, a refugee from so keep emphasizing that he's this Jewish refugee. And they're whitewashing him with this identity politics. And the first Jewish Secretary of State, he was unapologetic about his heritage and his embrace of the importance of American global power and democratic values. Well, here's the thing. So people in this community that have access to community notes for Twitter, they came to this platform, and what they did was they added a note to it. And I'll put this up on the screen so you can see it. And here it is. They say to the ADL that during a meeting of the Washington Special Actions Group, Kissinger said, "If it were not for the accident of my birth, I would be anti-Semitic. Any people who have been persecuted for 2,000 years must be doing something wrong." That doesn't seem like anybody that you should be celebrating if you are allegedly committed to ending Jewish hatred and you want to stamp out anti-Semitism. We know what this is about, though. He is someone who was allowed to have this opinion towards Jewish people because, by and large, he supported the project of apartheid. So that is why he is able to get away with that. That's why that is acceptable to the ADL. And, unapologetic about his heritage that Henry Kissinger may have been. I mean, who really is ashamed about where they came from? And there's like very little reason often for you to forsake your heritage unless you come from like a lineage of people who are actually like bloodthirsty. But we know that Henry Kissinger wasn't going to have a conscience that had him give that up. And so he's unapologetic about it, but he's as unapologetic about all the blood that was shed in those countries that I previously listed. Again, Cambodia, Angola, Vietnam, all of these different countries that were impacted. Chile, Argentina, Latin American countries, the global South particularly, Pakistanis, all these countries that colloquially and sometimes pejoratively are the third world, right? And often we like to say we're better than them, but also, of course, we're better than them. We're not being carpet bombed in the way that those countries have been carpet bombed by people like Henry Kissinger's, who are revered statesmen, according to this. So thank you, John, for your super sticker. I really appreciate this. I'm going to get to some of your comments in just a moment. If you have anything you'd like me to comment on specifically, address questions or whatever. And also, thank you so much, Lady Alex M. There is a Patreon. There's a Shadowproof Patreon that you can sign up to if you want to go look for that. Also, you can subscribe to this channel if you so choose, or you could just go to the dissenter.org. If you go to the dissenter.org and you subscribe to the newsletter, I don't always talk about the issues I'm doing in this show broadly. I have pretty clear focus over at the letter on whistleblowers and Julian Assange press freedom and government secrecy, which we'll be getting to. But there's an intersection between Kissinger and all of that, because Kissinger was involved in attacks on journalists, the wiretaps of people, wanting to go after Daniel Ellsberg and all of that. And so, this is why there's that connection. And yes, lady, Alex M. Kissinger and Albright are now dancing together in hell, and an atheist. Yeah, no, look, I'm not one to go around preaching religion either, but in order to make it more fun to celebrate the end of Henry Kissinger, I too will be entertaining all the images that anyone wants to put before me of Henry Kissinger burning in hell, the purgatory that he finds. Did he get to the pearly gates? Did he try to go in? Was he denied access? Was he then sent in this like Tower of Terror type elevator that sent him down to the bottom, the farthest depths to meet Satan? Look, whatever your preferred mythology is for the afterlife, let's entertain those images and let's treat them as real, because we never got any sort of we never got any sort of justice. So yeah, I like that idea, Michael. This is a good idea. The Church of Satan should declare this a holiday or something. Yeah, I think, because they're always they've been the balance, right? Like there was talk about them opening up abortion clinics so that they could get around the right-wing crackdown on women's right to choose. And they always seem to like bring some balance to our religious extremism that seems to permeate so much of American culture and government policy. So I talked really long about Henry Kissinger, but it's just so exciting. I mean, we wanted this so long. For many years, we've wanted this big, giant sack of blubbery shit to no longer be here anymore, and he isn't here. And also the outpouring of support for his death and just being so grateful that he is gone put powerful people in a bind because they can't really express it. And like, that's a good lead into discussing what I want to say about how Joe Biden has now this label of Genocide Joe. And we're looking at the war on Gaza and we're trying to figure out what is going to happen next. Where does this go? There's a truce. It seems tenuous. It's been developed with people in Qatar and Egypt. And it was not necessarily because the EU countries or even the US were leaders and helped broker a ceasefire, but it's because of those countries that are in close proximity to this and don't want this to spill over anymore, don't want a regional war, have been trying to deal with this. And so Genocide Joe, I went looking. Joe Biden has not put out a statement in support of Henry Kissinger, had not before I started the show. Now I'm going to go back to whitehouse.gov and I'm going to see if there's anything. I see something about hostage releases in Gaza. I'm going to go to the briefing room. I'm going to click on statements. I see for today something about a PCE report. I see something about the inaugural meeting of the White House Council on Supply Chain Resilience. Kirsten Allen, the press secretary, Kirsten Allen, on the vice president's travel to the United Arab Emirates. There's a readout of a call with the president of the United Arab Emirates. I don't see any, nothing from Joe Biden. I don't know. Let me go to his Twitter. Maybe there's something from him personally, from the POTUS account. Just scrolling. 14 hours ago, though, there's something about CS wind. So wind towers in Colorado. It's about wind energy. I see something about a billionaire minimum tax of just 25% would raise $440 billion over the next 10 years. So he's starting to borrow some of Bernie Sanders' campaign from 2020 so that he can deaden the blow from being involved in all the violence that happened. And so, yeah, nothing like that to me is like Joe Biden is part of this world. Joe Biden is part of this. So why don't we have a statement? And I'm not here to praise Joe Biden for not having a statement that commemorates the death of Henry Kissinger. I'm not saying that I want that at all, but why would this be? Could it be that the White House feels that they're in a position where it would be a political cost if they put out a statement? Like, do they believe there would be a backlash because they've gone too far? So right now, when we discuss the Israel war on Gaza, let's play the clip here of John Kirby, who is with the National Security Council. He's a military guy, and he was asked about this Genocide Joe moniker, and that happened 9 days ago, 9 or 10 days ago was when he was asked about it. And then, they had to deal with this. They had to deal with the fact that this is increased in popularity. They had to face it because there are jurisdictions, little like districts in swing states with the Arab population. There are younger people, millennials, Gen Z. They're saying they're not going to support Joe Biden in 2024. They're not saying they're going to go vote for Donald Trump. They're saying they would sit the election out and there will be a consequence to Joe Biden. And that if he doesn't want to lose to Donald Trump, a man with 4 to 5 criminal cases pending against him, who could be a convicted felon at some point, but still be running for president. If you don't want to lose to Donald Trump, then you'll have to figure out how to win without us, because we can't support you because of all the blood that you have spilled again. And so here is John Kirby.
Second question. Protesters here in D.C., in New York, across the country, they've settled on a nickname for the president. They've been calling him Genocide Joe. They wrote it on the gates. Do you have a response from the White House to that nickname that they've settled on?
We're not worried about nicknames and bumper stickers. I mean, it's First Amendment, free speech. The president's focused on, as he wrote in his op-ed, on making sure that we can continue to support Israel as they fight a terrible terrorist group, Hamas, and as we all work together to get humanitarian assistance in and get people out, including hostages. I said this the other day. Again, people can say what they want on the sidewalk, and that we respect that. That's what the First Amendment's about. But this word genocide is getting thrown around in a pretty inappropriate way by lots of different folks. What Hamas wants, make no mistake about it, is genocide. They want to wipe Israel off the map. They've said so publicly, more than one occasion. In fact, just recently. And they've said that they're not going to stop. What happened on the 7th of October is going to happen again and again and again. And what happened on the 7th of October? Murder, slaughter of innocent people in their homes or at a music festival. That's genocidal intentions. Yes, there are too many civilian casualties in Gaza. Yes, the numbers are too high. Yes, too many families are grieving. And yes, we continue to urge the Israelis to be as careful and cautious as possible. That's not going to stop, from the president right on down. But Israel is not trying to wipe the Palestinian people off the map. Israel's not trying to wipe Gaza off the map. Israel's trying to defend itself against a genocidal terrorist threat. So when we're going to start, if we're going to start using that word, fine, let's use it appropriately.
Okay, way in the back.
It's an incredible amount of denial. You could use the word gaslighting, but I don't think it's gaslighting. I think it's actually even worse. It is it's a whitewashing. It's a deliberate obfuscation of the reality. The people who are being wiped out are not Israelis. Hamas does not have the capability to carry out genocide and wipe out the Israeli population. They don't have that kind of numbers. They don't have an air force. They don't have bombs. They're not being given 14 million of aid, which is what the Biden White House has been promising or would like to get to Israel. They're not being given missiles and weaponry with no strings attached to say, you just do whatever, we trust you. Just try to be more precise in your targeting. Any targeting would be more precise. When I say are being precise, I think that's the other thing, is they are being precise. This is what they want to do with their explosives, their weaponry, the white phosphorus, the whatever they're detonating and unleashing on people of Gaza, and the lies that they're spreading about Hamas being in hospitals. They've now destroyed 26 of the 35 hospitals that were in Gaza. There are 9, maybe 10, could have pop-up hospitals from aid groups, but those are not there for permanently. So how do you get food to these people? Running water. People have been starving and dehydrated and trying to find ways to take care of their basic human needs for a month and a half to 2 months now. And you're saying that the group Hamas, which runs Palestine, runs Gaza, is trying to wipe Israel off the map. In the meantime, that is exactly what we see Israel is doing to North Gaza. Now they've moved on to southern Gaza, or would like to if they could. Right now there's a truce, but they haven't ceased their attacks on Palestinians. They've been, while the world is watching Gaza, carrying out violence in the West Bank. They've been executing and kidnapping kids and parents, and they go to schools and they take and detain children. The hostage releases or the prisoner swaps that we've seen have been illustrative of what goes on. You have Hamas that has kidnapped these hostages, they have these hostages. They are using them the same way that Israel would use Palestinians. So this is a situation that's created by virtue of the apartheid state. But we also have to remember here that Israel is the one that has power over the Palestinians. These are stateless people. They're occupied. And so this isn't a kind of like, this is why I have a problem with the comparison of October 7th to September 11th, because, when those hijackers took the planes and they flew them into the World Trade Center and they attacked people, they attacked those buildings, they attacked the Pentagon. When that happened, we were not involved in an apartheid state. We were not, yes, I understand that there's the bin Laden letter, and he points to the presence of the U.S. in the Middle East, and that's the grievance that is thrown around to justify retaliation, and that's the inspiration for the Islamic extremism that was happening. But when you think of it in comparison, it can't be that October 7th is their 9/11. It's not, because we were not enforcing an apartheid state against people. We were not enforcing an apartheid state against Arabs. That is something that was happening. It wasn't, like, it'd be like South Africans saying that when Nelson Mandela or a group of more extreme people decided to attack in South Africa, that now they were having a 9/11. Well, no, those people are responding to your efforts to subjugate and oppress them and keep them from being able to live. So that's what is the dynamic. The dynamic is that you have asserted control over these people, and they are fighting back because they do not want to be oppressed anymore. And that's not to endorse the violence, but to say that your warfare that you're carrying it out is primarily one-sided, because Israeli government and the military holds the power. They hold so much more power that the best that Hamas can do is hide in tunnels and wait for like basically engage in guerrilla warfare. And then, I don't know why Israel would want to do any kind of a ground invasion, because I feel like that would feed into what Hamas is about, or would actually make it easier for them to counter this way of just attacking from the air and obliterating and targeting journalists. Over 60 journalists have been murdered or executed by Israeli military forces. And that's something I want to do more with in the coming days or weeks, something to pay tribute to their sacrifice and what they've been doing. But these are people in Gaza who have gone on the front lines, and they're not the people at CNN. They're not the people at MSNBC or these other networks, the more prestige media networks, who have only embedded with Israeli officials or gone where the Israeli military forces will allow them. They won't go in harm's way. They don't want to be in there. And also, we know the ceasefire, that the Biden White House didn't want the ceasefire, because to have a ceasefire would mean that more journalists might be able to go access Gaza and bring people images of what was happening, and to use their platforms, their networks, to spread to Americans what your tax dollars are doing when you fund the Israeli government and its military to attack people in Gaza. So, all right, this is an hour. We're at the hour mark, and that was John Kirby, who spoke about Genocide Joe and that label, and he doesn't really have a response other than to say, we're not the genocide people, they are the genocide people. So just to project and deflect. And that's typical. And if these people feel that Henry Kissinger inspired them at all, then he would be pleased, because that's exactly what Henry Kissinger would do. That is how Henry Kissinger would handle the press, would be to say that, Israel is not the genocide. They're not involved in genocide. It's Hamas that's involved in genocide. And so the other thing I want to show here is, as I was coming on air, we learned that Mehdi Hasan's show over at MSNBC has been canceled. And why? Why was it canceled? Well, it was canceled for the same reasons that Phil Donahue had his show canceled during the Iraq War. That's what I presume is the dynamic behind there. They're saying that they're going to cut his show and make him a fill-in host and allow him to come on and be part of Ayman Mohaldin's 2-hour broadcast. Like, they're going to expand him to a 2-hour show. I think they're going to have Ayman on the weekend, it seemed like. And so we can't have too many Arab voices or people who are speaking up for Palestinians. We'll limit it to one. We don't want it to bring too much attention to our network, that there is room for voices to speak in support of Palestinians or to challenge Israeli officials when they come on our air. And so here's a clip I think many of you might have seen. But why don't we take a moment here to look at Ambassador Mark Regev. And just as we mark this loss, and again, it's not because I was watching Mehdi Hasan's show regularly that I bring this up. I bring this up so that we can recognize what happens in media and see the way that control is taking place in the media space. And so here is the ambassador. We'll watch just a little bit of this. Here he is challenging. Here he is treating an Israeli official in a far different way than what is typically allowed.
We will destroy Hamas. We'll dismantle their military machine, and we'll take apart their political control of Gaza. That's good for Israel for obvious reasons. We don't have to live in fear of terrorists crossing the border and killing our people, butchering our children in the middle of the night. But it's ultimately also good, and I hope you agree with me, it'll be good for the people of Gaza, who deserve better than this terrible, authoritarian, extreme Hamas regime.
The people of Gaza are still alive. As I say, more than 11,000 people dead, reported dead, 4,000 children. I just want to pull up on the screen.
Hamas's numbers.
You say Hamas's numbers. I should point out, just pull up on the screen. In the last two major Gaza conflicts, 2009 and 2014, the Israeli military's death tolls matched Hamas's health ministry death toll. So, and the UN human rights groups all agree that those numbers are credible. But look, your wider point is true.
Can I challenge that? Will you allow me to challenge that, please? Can I just challenge that? I'd like to challenge that. I'll try to be as brief as you are, sir. Those numbers are provided by Hamas. There's no independent verification. And secondly, more importantly, you have no idea how many of them are Hamas terrorists, combatants, and how many are civilians. Hamas would have you believe that they're all civilians, that they're all children. And here we have to say something that isn't said enough. Hamas, until now, we're destroying their military machine, and with that, we're eroding their control. But up until now, they've been in control of the Gaza Strip. And as a result, they control all the images coming out of Gaza. Have you seen one picture of a single dead Hamas terrorist in the fighting in Gaza? Not one. Is that by accident, or is that because Hamas can control the information?
You asked me a question and you
Gaza?
said you would be brief. I haven't, you're right, but I have seen lots of children with my own lying eyes being pulled from the rubble.
Because they're the pictures Hamas wants you to see. Exactly my point,
because they're dead,
They're
Mark.
the pictures
Also
Hamas
but
wants.
they're also people your government has killed. You accept that, right? You've killed children, or do you deny that?
No, I do not. I do not. I do not. First of all, you don't know how those people died, those children.
Oh, wow.
First of all, we don't want to see a single child killed.
Okay, here's my question for you, Mark. You say, I agree with you. I agree with you. We shouldn't blind.
You don't know how those children died. That's what the ambassador said. And I suppose it's wrong to have a host who is shocked to hear that kind of rhetoric from an Israeli official. These Israeli officials, by the way, they keep telling us exactly what is happening. They're not hiding it. They come out there, they speak about their genocidal or their ethnic cleansing intentions. We know there's a leaked report that came out in which pushing over 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza was considered an option, a viable or constructive option to try to get them to be accepted by Egypt, potentially other surrounding countries that could handle the refugee population. And so there's an example of actually pushing back, and you can't have that during war. We know that is something that NBC is searching for, probably a different face. They don't want Mehdi Hassan to become a face of their coverage. Certainly, that is a moment that went viral for NBC. The other bland, unchallenging, catering to the elites and just reinforcing U.S. foreign policy, that doesn't get shared. Nobody wants to promote that positively. They would trash it. They would trash segments with these officials. But also, I mean, I suppose, if it's like Jake Tapper or something like that, we get to maybe have access to the unvarnished truth of what these officials stand for. I don't know if that's always good for those people either, but see, they do not want someone like Mehdi Hassan, but they also are telling us that they cannot trust another Arab voice to be given a platform on their network. And they seem to think they can control Ayman Mohaldin more. Ali Velshi has had a show on MSNBC. I don't know how he's doing. And some of these people were voices they wanted to pull off the air and not feature after the attack from Hamas. So here is something going on. It's a dynamic. It's part of all of this. And meanwhile, as they're controlling the conversation, manufacturing consent continuously, even as a ceasefire is potentially in the works, and there are some positives happening, and the pause is taking place. This truce has come about despite the genocidal position of many of the people in the Knesset and Netanyahu. And, I don't think that anything that the U.S. government has done is constructive in actually making this be they're willing to allow Israel to go back to bombing Gaza. They just want it to be markedly different so that they don't have to deal with as much of a backlash later. And this truce, again, like as what I'm talking about, Stop Cop City, you're right. I keep saying truce. I keep saying ceasefire, and Israel is violating it. So just to be clear here, I'm just mentioning these words because this is what we describe and understand is supposed to be the present situation. And it's a far better situation than where we were 2 to 3 weeks ago, where hundreds of people, if not 500 to 700 people, were being killed on a daily basis. At one point, a rate was 400 or so children a day that were being killed. Now there's over 15,000 people that have been killed. That number is probably closer to 20,000. There's people who are buried in the rubble. We still don't know the full death toll. And meanwhile, you have a president who goes on TV and other officials who go on TV and say, well, those are Hamas numbers. We don't know if we can believe that those are actually dead children. We don't know if those, like that number that is being shared, we don't know if all those people and how many of those people were Hamas terrorists. Hamas doesn't want people to see the terrorists that are being dug out of the rubble. All I see are families being murdered. That's what I see. So I said that I was going to get to the CIA lawsuit, or the lawsuit against CIA spying. So let's do that. But first, I can't let Hillary Clinton off the hook. So I want to show you this clip that I have available here of her. She's teaching a class right now at Columbia University. There's been a crackdown on academic freedom. There are speakers who are and student groups that are trying to hold events at campuses throughout the country to discuss what is happening in Gaza. And administrations are saying it's unsafe and they're canceling those events. This is a crackdown on freedom of expression. So anyways, here is a clip of students protesting Hillary Clinton, who is a professor right now, she's a visiting professor, and she's teaching. And so this was what was seen. And here's another thing to celebrate. The kids are all right these days, guys. They're doing some pretty good stuff out there. So that loops, and it's a short clip, and thanks to the folks over at Breakthrough News for pulling and putting that into a form that could be shared. And if you are not subscribed to Breakthrough News, I encourage you to. They have some tremendous interviews, particularly on Gaza. Abby Martin joined Brian Becker yesterday for another interview about the reality on the ground in this apartheid violence that is taking place. Of course, Abby, she did the foreword for my book, Guilty of Journalism, the political case against Julian Assange. So let's get to this, and then I can wrap and conclude here. And Abby is going to be speaking at the Belmarsh Tribunal in DC. I look forward to hearing her and some of the other speakers who will be there for this event. I had the honor of being part of the Belmarsh Tribunal in DC when it was convened in January. And then later they convened one in Sydney. There's been, I think, 6 at this point, or this will be the 6th one, maybe. In any case, I would like to get into something that I've covered involving the lawsuit against spying, the espionage operation that was directed against the Ecuador embassy where Julian Assange was living. And he was there from 2012 to 2019 when he was expelled. And during that time, he had many visitors that came to see him. And while he was there in the embassy, those people who came to visit him, Americans, they were targeted. We know that this firm that was hired, UC Global, it was contracted to do embassy security, but at the same time, David Morales, the UC Global director, had the UC Global contractors going through phones that were handed over to them. So when you went to the embassy, you had to give your belongings, including your electronics, to the security checkpoint. And you weren't allowed to have it with you when you were meeting Julian Assange. So what we know is that the phones were opened. There were security staff or contractors that were going into the physical structure of the phone. They were taking pictures of the SIM card. They were looking for the IMEI number. And I'll describe why that is so invasive to someone's privacy. I wrote about this in my recent article over at thedissenter.org. Let me go ahead and put this up on the screen here, just for those of you who are interested. Thanks for being here. We've entered the second hour of this broadcast. I don't intend to be going for much longer, but I welcome all of you for being here to watch this. The people who are here tuned in live, thank you for watching. And this is the article. The U.S. says if CIA-backed embassy security opened phones of Assange visitors, it was constitutional. There's another report that I put out. This is over at the dissenter.org. And if you go over there and you become a subscriber, you can get access to all these updates. There's a free subscription. There's a premium subscription. Really encourage you to sign up for this journalism so that you can stay on top of things that are going on with Julian Assange, as well as the attacks on freedom of the press that occur globally, and the war on whistleblowers that we see happening on a regular basis. So what happened was there was a motion to dismiss, and on November 16th, they're seeking to dismiss this case that has been brought by 4 individuals, Americans, and the attempt is to challenge the espionage operation that we know was carried out against Julian Assange, and to say that the privacy rights of Americans were violated in violation of the Constitution. This was in August 2022. 4 Americans sued Margaret Ratner Kunstler, a civil rights activist and human rights attorney, Deborah Herbeck, a media lawyer who represented Assange at WikiLeaks, journalist John Getz, who worked for Der Spiegel when the German media organization first partnered with WikiLeaks, and then journalist Charles Glass, who wrote articles on Assange for The Intercept. When they went there, they were required to surrender their electronic devices. We know that there was a folder that was marked CIA on David Morales' laptop. So you can no longer say that there wasn't some kind of a connection happening. What's unfolding and gets no attention except from this channel and then maybe a few other places. El País has been covering it in Spain. There is a Spanish criminal case that has been unfolding against Morales and a few other individuals from UC Global that was brought by Assange, alleges privacy violations, and goes after them for their role in facilitating the spying operation against the Ecuador embassy. It's everybody who was inside of it. They were primarily targeting Assange, but they bugged it. They planted microphones, they put them in the extinguisher, the fire extinguisher. They put the microphones in the women's bathrooms. They were going after attorney-client privilege material. They were going after conversations he had with his doctors and nurses. We know that people were designated priority targets. The reports included meeting dates, copies of passports of Americans. There were contents from conversations with the WikiLeaks founder. And then there's videos of the meeting that we know existed. There was a constant feed, and it's believed that they had access. On some occasions, the casing of the cell phone was taken off. It was opened. They were photographing the International Mobile Equipment Identity Number, the IMEI. It's a unique code that identifies a device, and it's one of the most valuable pieces of information for anyone looking to hack a phone. This is part of identifying you as a subscriber when you're using mobile services. When a cell phone connects to a network, this identity number is automatically transmitted. And so this came up in the course of this hearing, and I cover it, but I'm going to go and give a fuller picture of what was happening with this rare court hearing that typically we do not have this. We do not have moments where oral argument is allowed by a U.S. court to come in and challenge CIA spying. When's the last time you saw any news about holding accountable the actions of, or attempting to hold accountable the actions of the CIA globally in a court setting? And that's something that now the U.S. attorney, an assistant U.S. attorney, Jean David Barnea, has been invited to or has been tasked with representing the government and defending the CIA and Mike Pompeo from this lawsuit. And so he came in, Southern District of New York. They were at this courthouse. This is the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. there's Pompeo. Of course, he labeled WikiLeaks the non-state hostile intelligence service, very aggressively going after WikiLeaks when he was the CIA director. So we presume that anything that was happening with the embassy, it's some kind of involvement. We have reports that there were sketched plans to kidnap or assassinate Julian Assange. So CIA and Pompeo, the targeting of the embassy, they are at this courthouse, and John Kodal is the judge. So John Kodal and this assistant U.S. attorney, Barnea, are there, and they're going back and forth over what was alleged to have happened, what these Americans have alleged happened when they were targeted at the embassy. And I'm just, before I wind down and wrap this all up, I'll go back to some comments that you have left and engage with you, but I just want you to hear this exchange. And this is from the transcript. This is the transcript of the oral argument. So this was towards the beginning of the hearing. And these aren't very long hearings. They last like 15 or 20 minutes. And then this is done so that they can decide on whether to dismiss the lawsuit. So we don't know that they're going to be able to bring their claims against the CIA. But this judge has been more open than others, and you can hear it. So Barnea laid out the way that he understands the Fourth Amendment. And he says that the cases that the plaintiffs rely on, these Americans, for example, ACLU v. Clapper, that's a case that involved trying to challenge the NSA's surveillance, the way that they were accessing Americans' telephone metadata without a warrant, and all of that is linked to, let's say, the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden's revelations, what he brought to the world in 2013. So that's mentioned, and the court says ACLU v. Clapper, and when I say the court, that's what it reads in the transcript. So when I say the court, I'm talking about the judge. ACLU v. Clapper talked about not only the collection of the information, but the maintenance in the government's database. Right, Barnea said. And again, maintenance there, I think, is different from what we are talking about. The allegations in this case, the maintenance was an actively used and regularly accessed database that was, as described in the Second Circuit's opinion, one that the government regularly looked at, and necessarily, by consistently examining that database, was sort of necessarily looking through, among many other records, the plaintiff's own records. Okay, I don't really know what he just said there. That's hella confusing. But Barnea goes on to talk about the Fourth Amendment, and he says that the plaintiffs have not alleged sufficient facts that, if proven, would establish that the CIA controlled or directed the Spanish defendants. Plaintiffs assert that the Spanish defendants were approached by intermediaries, supposedly on behalf of the CIA, to conduct surveillance on Assange and his visitors. They claim that the CIA provided some technical assistance in implementing that surveillance, and they claim that the CIA promised contracts or remuneration in exchange for the provision of that information. None of those allegations, even assuming their truth, established that the CIA controlled or directed the actions of the Spanish defendants. The Second Circuit has already articulated, applied a relevant standard, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the judge asked, contemporaneous monitoring was done from the United States, wasn't it? And then Barnea had to concede that that is what the Americans are claiming. And the judge said, so U.S. agents were monitoring the feed in the United States, and that's not sufficient involvement by the government? Okay, so the judge can identify the bullshit here in the assistant U.S. attorney's remarks, trying to argue that everything that's in this case, by the way, has to be taken at face value for the purposes of the motion to dismiss everything that are alleged. It's not that those facts have been proven, but they are treated as verifiable fact, and the government has to be able to rebut it. And so saying that there's evidence that the CIA was able to access these audio and video feeds, doesn't that smack of sufficient involvement? That's what the judge was saying there. And the response from Barnea, which is a bit baffling. The question is not involvement by the government, but it's control and direction over the foreign actor by the U.S. government. Oh, so the question is, were the people who were doing the actual searches and seizures abroad controlled and directed by the U.S. government in the relevant sense in order to implicate the Fourth Amendment? So, in other words, gibberish, but the judge asks, why isn't there at least an issue of fact as to what the involvement of the government was? So if it's a question of fact, then those are things that could be handled during a trial, or there could be, this is a civil suit. So there could be there would be a trial that would happen over the civil suit. If the Americans were able to prove the evidence of espionage with CIA involvement, then they would win the case. So they're alleging that those facts are there and they want to go through discovery and find out these details. So the judge asks about that aspect. And he claims that we're saying, if you look at the allegations, this is Barnea, the assistant U.S. attorney, we are saying if you look at the allegations in the complaint of the CIA's involvement here, it does not rise to the level that would satisfy the standard. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down and just go to a little bit more here. So the judge disputes this idea that there isn't any involvement on the part of the U.S. government. And we get into the Fourth Amendment, and they get into the issues around whether the Fourth Amendment has any protection for people who go to the embassy. The position that the U.S. government is taking through this lawsuit is that when you, as an American, if you're an American, if you're not from America and you're watching this broadcast, then just enjoy learning that we aren't really the democratic, free state that everyone in power claims we are. But they're saying that Americans, when they go to embassies or they travel anywhere abroad, basically, you have given up your Fourth Amendment protections for and against warrantless surveillance. You know, to the extent that those even exist, and they're not even enforced, there's no repercussions for anyone in power violating that. We have a total surveillance state. There's a wide apparatus that can target just about anybody that wants to. And this is part of what we've learned when it comes to a lot of the surveillance that still exists, the remnants of the Patriot Act and so on and so forth. But to the extent that we claim that people who are Americans should not be targeted, they got into a conversation about the Fourth Amendment and if it could protect those people who went to the embassy that were Americans. And in having this conversation, the court came on something peculiar, and this is the last thing I'll highlight because I found this to be one of the most remarkable exchanges. It's the part where the court notes that plaintiffs allege that the contents of their electronic devices were seized, and you don't seem to dispute in your paper that a warrant will be necessary. It would be necessary to seize the contents of the electronic devices. And then the assistant U.S. attorney responded, I don't believe that a warrant is ever required outside the United States. The Second Circuit has held that the warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment only applies within the United States. And the judge asked, what case tells you that that is the way things are supposed to be? And Barnea, the assistant U.S. attorney, replied, the bombing in East Africa, the U.S. embassy bombings in East Africa, among others, have held, I guess there's a case around this, I'm not that familiar, that the warrant requirement specifically of the Fourth Amendment does not apply extraterritorially. There is nonetheless a reasonable requirement that applies from the Fourth Amendment to surveillance by the U.S. government of U.S. persons abroad. The judge says, no. We're talking about the plaintiff's allegation that their electronics, that they left their electronic devices as well as passports, and that the outsides were copied. And you said no expectation of privacy with respect to that. And there is a section that deals with the fact that the plaintiffs allege that the contents were copied. And the only response that I saw in your papers was not no warrant is required. You assume that a warrant is required for the contents of Americans' electronic devices. that are left at this embassy. But you say the plaintiffs have not alleged that no warrant was obtained. So there's some dispute about whether that's what actually was said. And then there's this long, sprawling answer that is given, and I'm not going to sit here and read it. But after the U.S. attorney, the assistant U.S. attorney spoke, the judge said, "I frankly don't understand what you just said." And they had to break it down. And as they broke it down, the judge made it clear that he had read in the government's response to this lawsuit that these Americans have not alleged that there is no warrant, that no warrant was obtained to access their phones, their electronics, their belongings, etc. So therefore, they have failed to state a claim for a violation of the Fourth Amendment. This is interesting. So the judge says, "You're telling me, no, that's not what you said. I'll go back and read your papers with much more care." I did read them with care initially, but the next question that I have for you is whether a warrant was obtained or not. Can you tell me now? The implication of what you're telling me is, of course, there was no warrant. No warrants are required to seize the contents of a phone from an American citizen abroad. He's asking plainly, did you get a warrant to target these people that the UC Global contractors were collecting all of this from their property? There's feeds, there's audio, video feeds. The CIA has access, or someone in U.S. government intelligence agents are watching this. People are accessing these feeds. And the U.S. government's response is that a constitutional warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment does not apply outside the United States. Again, restating that they believe that people who go to this embassy have lost their privacy rights, have no reasonable expectation of privacy. Not just because, in this breath, he's not saying it's because Julian Assange is a national security target, which they've also said that as well. But in this, what they're saying is just plainly, no matter who is in that embassy, they do not have privacy rights. It's extraordinary. This is something that I think everyone should consider, because what they're telling you is that if you leave the U.S., you do not have constitutional rights. And that's not how I understand, and that's not how the attorneys represent these Americans understand the Constitution and the way it is supposed to supposedly offer some kind of privacy protections. So they're really blowing a hole in it. So much like they're blowing a hole in the First Amendment, again, with Assange, they're to blow a hole through the Fourth Amendment, it seems like, if they can, or at least in order to defend the CIA, they're pretending like the Fourth Amendment isn't what it is and has been on the books for decades, for over 200 years, right? So here they go. And they're still going back and forth. And this goes on and on. But again, like, the point of all of this is just to say that the judge pins them down and says, do you have a warrant? And they refuse to confirm or deny whether they got a warrant. They won't speak to the facts at all. And now the judge is probably understandably vexed by all of this. What they decided to do is allow the lawsuit to be updated. And so the next development in this lawsuit, if you're wondering where this goes next, is that they are going to have the lawyer for the Americans put forward the claim that there was warrantless surveillance against them, and that's what needs to be addressed. And then the government will have to respond to the allegation that the surveillance happened without a warrant, and they'll go back and forth. And then that will become an element of the decision on whether to dismiss the case. But what we're seeing here is that I think this case is stronger than the U.S. government would like it to be. And it's a much harder thing for them to deal with. And I think potentially much harder than what we saw from human rights organizations that were challenging NSA surveillance, trying to say that they were harmed, that there was injury. These are specific individuals. They went to this embassy. They visited. Those embassy security are not police, but the U.S. government keeps acting like they were police officers, so they should be allowed to go through people's electronics, rifle through belongings, and violate your privacy in ways that the police get away with in the United States. But those people, they're not deputized to do any enforcement of the law or policing for the U.S. They're in the embassy. And the idea that this is normal, what happened to the Americans who visited Julian Assange, journalists and attorneys who had their confidential sources compromised or attorney-client privilege information compromised. The idea that this is normal, that you go to an embassy, they take your stuff, they take photographs of your phone, they take it apart, they pick it apart, they might have a tracker planted on it. Who knows what kind of malware you have on it as you walk around? Do you have spyware on your device? Who fucking knows? You're now in trouble and you're walking around after you visited. The idea that it's normal that you do that happens to you because you went in an embassy that has video surveillance. That's what they say. They say that there's video surveillance there and there's a security checkpoint. So you give up your reasonable expectation of privacy. So basically, the normal surveillance that happens at government or diplomatic buildings has become a cover for allowing the CIA to come in and violate the privacy of everything that you own that is your personal property. That's what's happening in this case. That's why it's essential for people to pay attention to it. These arguments that are being put forward show the naked power that the U.S. wants to exercise globally. It's in this hyper-focused instance of going after Assange in the Ecuador embassy, but we really need to consider the ramifications of what the U.S. government is asserting here and the extent to which they believe they could work with diplomatic security of any embassy. I think it's a threat to lawyers. It's a threat to human rights people. It's a threat to press. It's a threat to doctors who might be meeting with political prisoners in these embassies. So if they're on the other side of the equation and are not working in concert with what U.S. foreign policy wants, then those people are going to be targets. They will be priority targets like Julian Assange. I need to wind down the show. But first, let me just get to a few comments and thank the people out there who have made donations and supported and made it possible for me to do the work that I do as a journalist. I'm back here. It's been over 2 months since I did a live stream. Well, I don't know what you mean there, but I wouldn't. Yeah, it's a constitution. It cons you into believing that you are having your rights protected and upheld. But let me just get to a few comments and I'll wrap this up. So thank you all. You noticed that I put up a picture of Mike Pompeo before he lost weight. And by the way, he's still lying about how he lost that weight. And I don't know why he won't tell us that he had a surgery. But I guess you can't trust any of these people to even tell us things that I don't know why that would be embarrassing. It happens all the time. People have procedures done. He wants people to believe that he lost the weight because he has some kind of fitness regimen that we should, or a diet that we should celebrate. And nobody loses that much weight from working out. So, and then thank you Tuesday for this comment, which will cover my face, but I'll cover my face so I can read your comment. The Blair quote that I read was so gross. Henry Kissinger was an artist, all right, of discord and deception and dissembling and death, hopefully the last of his kind, though HRC did try to be just like him as SOS, and she likewise is feated, though actions belie words. She habitually played the woman card, and I see here that another card, that of the survivor, the refugee, the minority, is being played to effect, adding an indisputable cherry we must swallow as a personally triumphant achievement on the top of a metaphoric, and it cuts off your comment. But I take your point, and I thank you for it, because those are really good words. And continue up here. Thank you. And then let's see. And then again, I already said something to you, lady, but thank you for stopping by and saying hello. Thank you for your ongoing brilliance and reporting. I appreciate the support of my work. John shares, I remember the Vietnam War and the trauma and pain inflicted on my uncle, who refused to fight and was imprisoned after being the first troops that invaded Cambodia. This man was a criminal. Fuck him. And then Connie, thank you. The Rolling Stone article on Kissinger said that he used the madman theory in Cambodia. And that was what, in the earlier part of the stream, I was referring to that as Ellsberg figured out that was in play. The madman theory was in play during that bombing, the carpet bombing of Cambodia. And let's see, Desert Mantis. They no longer make diplomats like Henry. Thank goodness. They're not as naked anymore, and they do hide. And Tony Blinken, he might have been counseled by Kissinger, but he can't act with the kind of confidence that Kissinger has and go out there and do what he does. So, and thank you, Kurt, for praising the book. I appreciate it. And Assange is someone who has spoken about the truth being able to make peace possible and prevent some of these wars. On a later show, I'll get into the journalists who have been massacred and pay some tribute. And on a later show, I'll get into some of the things we have learned through the WikiLeaks documents about Palestine, about Israel and Gaza. But that's the end. And I hope you all have been able to celebrate the death of Henry Kissinger the way that you choose. I hope you pour something strong or weak, however you take your alcohol. Find some wine to sip and enjoy. Put on some of your favorite music. Kick back, however, and just relish the fact that this person's gone. And also that when they died, it was extremely hard for elites to praise him without facing a backlash. And that's something to be gleeful and happy about. So with that, I will be back soon with another live broadcast. But until then, you all take care of yourselves and peace.